Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Adams from ProWritingAid. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I am joined by Sue Campbell. As founder of Pages and Platforms, Sue Campbell is the mindset and book marketing coach writers look to when they are ready to honor their dreams, address the negative stories they're telling themselves, and share their work with their ideal readers to maximize the impact of their words. Sue has helped hundreds of writers, from newbies to bestsellers, transform their inhibitive mindset around marketing and realize their full potential as authors. Her clients have exponentially increased their email lists and book sales, landed articles in prestigious publications such as the New York Times, done guest spots on popular podcasts, and more. Sue, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're so excited to hear what you have to tell us. And if you are ready, I will go ahead and disappear and I will just learn along with everyone else. And then I will be back at the end to assist with Q&A.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Michelle. I'm so happy to be here. ProWritingAid just puts on fantastic events and I always meet fantastic writers. So thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. And my mission is really to empower writers with marketing strategy, not tactics, right? We need to focus in on a strategy before you can add tactics on the top. So today I want to give you a 4-part framework that will actually help you grow your audience. And that is a very flexible framework. So you can pick the areas of marketing where you feel comfortable and confident. So Michelle already introduced me. I do just want to point out a couple of things. I work with nonfiction and fiction authors and in all niches. I love romance writers. You guys are, movers and shakers in the indie space particularly, and it just does my heart good to see so many people just going after it. Go ahead and grab a pen and a notebook. You probably will want to take notes. Turn off your phone if you can. I know sometimes we need them on for emergencies, but really try to spend this time to concentrate on you and how you want to move your career forward. Go ahead and tell me in the chat really quickly. And when it comes to marketing, what is your biggest challenge? What's the thing that keeps you stumbling and questioning? I got to scroll all the way down here. Let's see. Don't know where to start. Knowing I don't know. Finding new readers. I'm terrible at tooting my own horn. I'm too shy. Yep. Where to start and money. Finding who to query. Marketing doesn't work for me. Getting a plan, finding new readers, social media, that's always a big question. We'll talk about that. Translating posts into sales. It takes so much energy. Growing email lists since I'm just starting. Yes, so this is very in line with what I hear hundreds of readers that I've talked to, thousands probably by this point. You guys are not alone, right? We hear things like, I want to market, but I want to write, but I don't want to market, right? This isn't what I signed up for. I don't know where to start. It's confusing. It's overwhelming. These are very common refrains from writers that I talk to. And basically what everyone wants is some clarity around what's actually going to get you the best results for the time and energy that you're putting into it. Right? We have other things. Maybe we have day jobs, we have families, we have lives, and then we're writing. So if I'm going to spend any time marketing, I want to do something that's actually going to move the needle and that's going to work. So let's talk about what you will learn today. Number one, we're going to learn why marketing your book, just using all this slapdash of tactics and articles that you found from the internet, is likely to fail. Not that that's all bad information, but when we take that piecemeal approach of something here and something there, it doesn't always work to our advantage. I'll give you a better definition of marketing for those of you who have that sort of tentativeness around just marketing and putting yourself out there and tooting your own horn. We'll give you a better definition to work from. I'm going to tell you what your number one book marketing goal should be. And then I will also give you that 4-part foundational marketing strategy that will actually grow your audience. So what you already know, right, about marketing. One of the things when I always like to go through every once in a while and just do a quick Google search and see what are the first things that come up. And a lot of them are things that are very, simplistic. We know on a fundamental level, we have to write a great book. That doesn't help you with your marketing. You already know that. You have to write a great book in order for it to be successful. You have to have a great cover and a great book description, right? That's foundational. You absolutely have to have those things. You already know that. But having a great cover and a great description doesn't really give you the reach that you want right off the bat. And you have to present yourself professionally, and whatever that means for you and your ideal reader and your ideal audience. But you need to broadcast that, yes, I'm a professional writer. I have books for sale, right? We already know all of that. So those basic articles about what works for marketing, a lot of them are focused on, well, you have to write a really great book and get a great cover and get a great description. Well, then what? Because a lot of you have already done all of that, but you're still not getting the reach that you want. So notice that none of these things actually brings people to your book. And this is often the first pass of, information that you get when you start researching marketing. All of these are things that you're creating and that are sitting there static. It doesn't bring people to your book. So let's dive in and get you the information that you need here. Why does just doing Google searches for marketing not lead to you knocking it out of the park with your marketing, right? It's not a failure on your part. The problem with most online marketing advice is they're focused on tactics and not an underlying strategy, right? So tactics is like, oh, every writer needs to be on Twitter, or every romance writer needs to be on Pinterest, right? Those are tactics. It doesn't get at the underlying strategy. Those articles are often very bite-sized and have very clickbaity titles, right? It's someone, because as busy people, we want something really fast that we can absorb and something that catches our eye. Nothing wrong with that, perfectly natural. A lot of the advice also doesn't focus on your return on investment. It just kind of makes you feel like you're doing something, right? Like you're taking action, you're doing something, but it doesn't actually look at the data and see what actually moves the needle on sales. And it's also often a one size fits all mentality, right? Where they're like, every writer needs to do this or every writer needs to do that. It's all about Goodreads or it's all about Twitter or whatever it is at that moment. It's always going to change. So that is not a place to come from when you really want to build a career and have a long-term strategy. So lesson number 2 here is let's have a better definition of marketing. Because when a lot of people think of marketing, they think of the worst examples of marketing, right? So someone who's coming on too strong, high pressure tactics, all of these things that we associate with high pressure marketing are not a good fit for authors. And we don't really like them, right? And they have that sort of whiff of desperation about them, like someone's trying to meet their sales quota before the end of the month. That's not the kind of image that we want to create and the kind of interaction that we want to have online. So a better definition of marketing, first of all, I wish I didn't even have to use the word. A much better definition is when we think about it as building long-lasting connections with readers, right? Almost everyone in this audience, I would wager, wants to write more than one book. So it's not just about marketing one book, and it's not just about having success with one book, and then everybody who loved that book can't find your next book. We have to have a way, a strategy that creates long-lasting connections with the readers who find you and love your work. So instead of saying, I'm going to do my marketing, it's like, today I'm going to build some relationships with readers. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. It's almost gone, but you might hear me throat clear a couple times. The next one we are going to talk about, and I think this is starting to become more well-known, but it's not well-known enough yet. And it's going to be really important for a number of reasons, but I want to give it to you in the context of this 4-part framework, but be on the listen for that specific, what is your biggest marketing goal? And we'll get to that in a moment. Let's dive into the 4-part framework that will actually help you grow your audience. So it's called the connection system. It was developed by my mentor, Tim Grahl, who trained me personally in book marketing. He is sort of a phenomenon in the book marketing world. At one point, he had 5 of his clients on the New York Times bestseller list, all at the same time, right? Which sounds both thrilling and horrible. Like, I know the stress that it takes to do launches, and the fact that he was doing it at that level for 5 people at the same time is completely remarkable. He's also a systems guy. So it was really important to him to have repeated processes that had evidence behind them and that he knew actually worked, right? He wasn't, yes, experimentation's great, but once we find the things that are working, we need to double down. So the 4 pieces of the system, which we'll go through one by one, are permission, content, outreach, and selling. So it's okay if you don't know what all of those mean yet. Let's dive into permission. So permission basically means that it is a sort of inherently non-slimy form of marketing, because people are giving you permission to talk to them, right? So for example, social media is one form of permission, right? If I follow Michelle on Instagram, I'm giving Michelle permission to show up in my feed, right? That's a form of permission. It's not actually the best form of permission for authors, because it's not very good at holding attention and building that long-term relationship. Social media is such a fire hose of information and, you know, stimulus that it's really easy to get lost, and it's a little harder to build those long-lasting connections with a big fan base. Not to say that it can't be done, there are always exceptions, but it's not the most effective. So the kind of, actually, I want to talk about this for a minute. Social media doesn't sell books very well at all, and the exception is TikTok for right now, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it doesn't sell books. When you have a large email list, for example, and then you have a social media following, the day that you launch a book, if you go out and, you know, promote it on social media and you send a newsletter to your list, for every 1 book you sell on social media, you'll sell somewhere between 5 and 20 copies to your email newsletter subscribers, right? So just beats the pants off of social media email lists. Now, right now, TikTok is extremely hot, and you can build an organic audience. It's still not early days, but it's still in the early reach days where you can organically build an audience on TikTok. And if you look for the hashtag book talk, it's extremely hot and fun right now. And book talk has actually pushed people onto bestseller lists. So right now they're the exception. But that probably won't last forever. Things change, algorithms change, you know, just fads change. But I wanted to put in the except TikTok in there right now, because I didn't want y'all to come at me and be like, well, what about TikTok, right? But by and large, it's not the most effective way to build your audience and get that permission. As I said, it's hard to drive readers to take buying actions on social. We don't need them to hit the heart button or the like button. We need them to click through to a link and buy a book, or we need them to click through and leave a review, or we need them to show up for us at a virtual reading, for example. Very hard to get that kind of action going on social media. Not impossible, but hard. It's really easy to get buried in the feed, or if you don't have a reputation with that platform's algorithm for putting out content that people are really engaging with, they simply won't show your content to very many people at all. You don't have any control over who sees your content and who doesn't. Rules change, algorithms change. As we know, Facebook and Instagram went down for a considerable period of time. Was that last week or the week before? Imagine if that was your book launch day and you had put all of your eggs in the Instagram basket, right? You would have had a pretty miserable day that day. You don't control it, right? It's out of your hands. So therefore, your number 1 book marketing goal, if you have multiple books that you're trying to promote and build a career, is to build your own email list. Hands down, I could not stress this point far enough. Anybody who had an email list that day, I got a number of emails, because I subscribe to a lot of email lists, from people saying, hey, Facebook and Instagram's down, how you doing, right? They were taking advantage of social media being down to point out the fact that I can still reach you because you're on my newsletter. So advantages to email lists: you can easily reach people who've loved your first book. You don't have to keep hustling for new readers with each and every book and trying to get your message out all over again and sort of reinventing your whole approach. Once you have an email list, people stay on that list unless they choose to unsubscribe. And therefore, if they enjoyed your first book, they're going to know when your second book, third book, fourth book, fifth book comes out, and you can easily reach them and keep growing that list in the meantime. You own your list. It cannot be taken away from you, except of course, that person owns their own information, so they can unsubscribe. But you have far more control over an email list than you do your social media following. You control the message, and you control who sees the message. And it's a far quieter and more intimate space where you can actually spur people to take action, right? Make the case for reading your book, make the case for leaving your review. It is just a much better medium for building that relationship. So in order to do this well, you may or may not know all of the steps involved, and we don't have time to sort of go into how to set it up, but I wanted to give you at least the little thumbnail sketch. You need a website. You need an email service provider, such as MailerLite or MailChimp or ConvertKit. There's, hundreds of them, but those are some of the major ones. You can't just do this from your Gmail account or your Yahoo account. You need to have an email service provider because there are certain rules, regulations, and laws you need to follow when you have an email list. You need sign-up forms on your website. And I really want you to have a reader magnet, or, they're also called sign up incentive or bribe to subscribe, right? There are lots of names for this, but basically it is something of value that you are giving to that reader in exchange for them giving you their email list. So think of it as a value exchange. If you are a series writer, a lot of times the writers are giving away the first book in a series or a prequel or a novella or a short story, something that gives people a taste of what your books are like so they can really know if you are for them or not. You also want to have a welcome email sequence. So when someone signs up, they'll get an email that automatically sends the reader magnet, and then they'll get a couple more emails over the next few days to really introduce yourself a little bit better and start building that relationship. It also helps people decide if you're a good fit. So you will get some unsubscribes sometimes in that initial few days when people sign up, and that's okay because you want people on your list who are very engaged and really, really do want to be there. So the second piece in the 4-part system, we just talked about permission. I want you to have an email list. The second piece is content. So that's any material that you put out into the world that's going to help someone decide if you're a good fit and they want to keep building that relationship and they want to read your stuff, right? I always talk about this as a grocery store sample, right? We'll probably never, ever have grocery store samples again, but when in pre-pandemic days, I could go to the grocery store and there'd be a sample table set up and I could try the blue corn tortilla chip before I put it in my grocery cart, right? So content is anything that you are putting out into the world that's going to help people get a taste of how you write, what your style is, what you talk about thematically, right? And I'm not just talking about blog posts. These are just some content ideas on this slide. We're very imaginative, we're writers, so you can think outside of this bulleted list. But basically, your website itself is content. Your newsletters that you'll send out to your email newsletter list, those are content. Your social media posts are actually content. If you do a reading, that's content. If you go on a podcast, the words that come out of your mouth, that's all content. Oftentimes, this is the part of the system that the writers I talk to like the best because we like writing. We like making content. So this may be somewhere where you really want to get creative and really think about all the fun that you could have with creating content because it will help you do your marketing. So must-haves for content, at a bare minimum, you need to have that email sequence for email new subscribers to welcome them. You need to have a regular newsletter for subscribers. It doesn't have to be every week. If once a month is all you can fit into your schedule, that's fine. But less than that, and people tend to forget about you, right? And then they get an email and they're like, who are you again? I don't remember signing up for this. Click unsubscribe. So you want to be building that relationship, right? Some writers think, hey, I don't want to bother people. I don't want to be a burden. So I'm only going to send an email when I have a new book coming out. Right? But this is like the friend who only ever calls you when they need help moving, right? If you're only reaching out to someone because you need them for something and you need them to buy your book, that's not a very good relationship, right? That's a take relationship where you're the one who's taking. So you want to be delivering value to your subscribers on a somewhat regular basis so they feel invested in you and they will respond when you do have a book coming out. And then where I want you to spend most of your energy with content is actually creating content to use with influencers. And we'll talk about that next, but you'll see why, right? When we're first writing our lists or creating our lists, we've got, 20, 30, 40, 50 people on it. We don't want to spend 20 hours a month creating content for that very, very small audience. We were going to go out and use someone else's audience that already has a large following that's full of people who would love our books. And we're going to create content for that audience. And we'll talk about that. So that is where outreach comes into play. So outreach means moving people from not knowing you and your book exist to now knowing that you exist. And this is the magic ingredient in your marketing, right? If you just do the first two pieces of this system, where you set up a website, you set up an email list, you give them a reader magnet, and you're putting out blog posts, right? That's just permission and content. You're essentially waiting for people to stumble into your digital spider web. And you're going to sit there and wait. And it's going to happen very slowly because there's a lot of competition for attention out there. Outreach is you being active enough to know who your ideal reader is, go and find them, get yourself in front of where they are, and then show them your content and invite them back over to your email list, right? This is the magic ingredient for growing your audience, but all of these pieces work together. Because if we just go out and do outreach, but we don't have an email list, someone hears me on a podcast and they're like, oh, that's great. I really enjoyed that. And then they can never find me again, right? Because they move on and they find out, oh, you find out that you didn't mean as much, right, as you thought. So they don't have a way to find you again by getting them to sign up for that newsletter. You've lost that and you've sort of squandered that outreach opportunity. So all of these pieces of the system work together. So a lot of people ask me, what is an influencer? And when they hear influencer, they think, oh, it's just like some 20-something or Gen Z person on Instagram who's like, got a deal with some clothing manufacturer and is trying to get me to buy something. That is one type of influencer, but broadly speaking, an influencer is anyone who has control of an audience or has access, control is kind of a yucky word, but has an audience that can get them to buy your book and become your fan. Right? So they have influence with that particular audience and they can say, hey, this book is excellent. I stayed up all night reading it. You should go out and pick it up. And a bunch of people will do that. That's an influencer. So I want you to think broadly about the types of influencers who you could potentially connect with. It's other authors in your genre. It's people who have, big influential blogs. It's people who are book reviewers. It's podcasters, people who book events, right? That's not even their audience, but they're sort of the gatekeeper. So event bookers are influencers. Journalists, librarians are wonderful influencers who I think are undervalued sometimes. People just with large email lists or large social followings. I don't want you to spend time building your own social following because it's not the best return on investment. But if other people have already taken the trouble to do it, there's no reason we can't leverage their audience and use it to our advantage, right? Okay, so outreach is actually a really big topic, right? It sounds like one thing, one part of the system, but to help people sort of wrap their arms around it, I created a breakout of these 7 steps to outreach. So step 1 is to get your mind right, right? This is a mindset piece, and I call myself a mindset and book marketing coach for a reason, because I can hand you a list of everything you need to do to make your book a success. But if you don't have a mindset that will make you willing to go out and do that, you won't ever do it. Right. So the first step of this, because pitching people makes you vulnerable, it makes you, subject to rejection and subject to being ignored. You really do need to get in a strong frame of mind to go out and do this. So that's step 1. Step 2, I want you to set your goals in a very concrete way of how many people you'll reach out to, how many books you want to sell, right? Some of your goals are aspirational and you don't have complete control over them. Those are sort of your big, hairy goals, they're sometimes called. So maybe it's, I want to sell 10,000 copies of my book, or I want to be on a certain podcast, or I want to be on a television show. That can be a big, hairy goal, but you need a number of concrete goals underneath those that you have the power to carry out that can help you attain that more aspirational goal. So you need to get really clear about what those goals are, because if you come into outreach and you're just like, oh, I'll just try to pitch one podcast, right? That's not enough to get you the momentum that you need to actually make a difference and see the needle move on your book sales or your list growth for that matter. The next piece is really important. And at the end of this webinar, I'll give you another resources that you can go and grab to learn more about this, because it's really important, is to take aim at your reader persona, right? So you need to know inside and out who is the perfect person to read your book, because that's going to help you figure out where you're even going to do your outreach. We don't want to waste time. I always use the example of, hey, if you are a children's book author and you find this guy at a party who doesn't have kids and doesn't have any nieces and nephews, and you're trying to get him to buy your book, you're wasting your time, right? We need to find our ideal reader and really concentrate and focus our efforts on that person. The next step is research. So once we know our ideal reader, we need to do the research to figure out where they are. Where are they online? Who already has an audience full of this type of person? And then we get into cultivating relationships. So with influencers, it's a great idea. It's not strictly necessary, but it's a great idea to sort of build some rapport and some goodwill before making your ask. Yes, cold pitches can absolutely work, but if there are particular people in mind who are heavy hitters in your space, cultivating that relationship first is going to go a long way to helping you sort of land that piece of outreach. Then we have the pitch itself. So it's you're sending an email or meeting with someone at a conference and you are asking for something. The important thing to know about pitching is this is not about you. It needs to be a win-win. You need to frame the thing that you're asking for in terms of what it can give to the other person, not what it can get to you. Influencers are there to serve an audience. And so if you can find a way to help them serve that audience effectively, it's going to be very easy for them to say yes. So too many people are like, hey, can I come on your podcast and talk about my book? Why would they do that, right? Very different to say, hey, can I come on your podcast and share with your audience XYZ that's going to make their life better or more entertaining or be completely fascinating to them, right? It's about what you can do for that influencer and that audience. And in the course of that, yes, you get to talk about your book, but you're going to be much more successful with pitches if you are not concentrating on yourself. You're concentrating on delivering value to the audience. And then step 7 of outreach is actually like delivering. How do you professionally execute whatever it was you promised to do for that influencer? So showing up to deliver the webinar like I'm doing today, showing up to be on a podcast, showing up for a reading. How do you be an absolute delight to work with so that influencer wants to work with you again and wants to recommend you to other influencers who they may know? Then the last piece of the system, we had 4 parts and we'll review them in a second, is selling, right? Offering your book to the right people. And selling is another place where we get a little squeamish. We get a little squeamish about the concept of marketing in general, and then we get a little squeamish about the word selling. I want you to think of it this way. I like to call this, I got this from another coach who's not in book marketing at all, but is just a coach. And she talks about clean selling. Clean selling is the concept of you have nothing to be ashamed of if you're delivering the right value to the right person, right? If you find out that, this little boy, your neighbor kid, loves dinosaurs, and you have a bunch of stuff in your closet from your kid's dinosaur craze, right? You're going to be like, oh, do you want all this dinosaur stuff? I know you like dinosaur stuff, right? And they're going to be like, oh, ecstatic. Yes, thank you, right? Think about it in terms of virtuous actions have virtuous results. And this is a concept I straight up stole from Buddhism, right? If we're coming at this with good intentions and we have virtuous intentions, then the actions will have virtuous results. So you can clean up your mindset and your mentality around selling before you do it. And it's actually going to feel really, really great. And it's going to be this huge personal development opportunity that you didn't even realize. Like, marketing is going to help you grow as a person. I want everyone to remember that making art, period, right? Writing books, period, is a virtuous act in and of itself. If everybody quit, all the writers in the world, right? Not just the people who make our TV shows, but book writers, journalists, all the writers tomorrow just said, nope, we're on strike, we're done. The world would feel that immediately. We provide so much value. I want you to really lean into that and know that you are creating something that is just right for this key group of people. And it's your job to find them and share your gifts with them. So that's how I want you to think about selling. I don't want you to think about like, I got to sell my books. I got to make back the money I put into it. I got to make back all the time I sat at the desks, right? That's not a clean place to come from when you're selling. It's like, no, I brought something forth into the world for a reason. And now I need to find the people who would benefit from it. Okay, so how do we put all of this together? And I want to leave time for questions. So we're wrapping it up here. We have the connection system. We've got permission, which is your email list. We've got content, which is going to help people decide if you're the right person for them to read. We've got outreach, which is you going out into the world and finding your readers instead of waiting for them to find you. And then we have selling, which is making sure you're letting them know, here's my books, you can buy them, right? And of course, selling is also just like getting someone to join your email list, right? You're selling yourself as an author, as an email list, as someone to follow. So let's look at the connection system in action. Just some examples. You can spin this 8 ways from Sunday, but these are a couple examples to get you thinking about it. So let's say that you befriend an influencer in your space with a popular podcast. So that is outreach. You moved that person from not knowing you exist to now knowing you exist. And then you pitch that influencer to be on their podcast. That is both outreach and content. The words that are coming out of your mouth are content on that podcast. At the end of the podcast, you're going to get teed up to say, where can we hear more from you? Where can we learn more about your books? You can invite them back to your email list at that point. You can even have a special page set up for those listeners. So then you can track, these are how many people came to me because of that podcast. That's permission. You're converting them to your email list at the end of that. Then every subscriber gets that welcome series with the sign-up bonus. That's more content. And then every newsletter, it's not about buying your book all the time, but at the footer of every email, you're certainly going to have thumbnails of your book and little descriptions and a link to buy. So that's selling, right? That's one example. Another example is you could decide to review a book from a well-known author on your own podcast. That's content, okay? You owning your own podcast is not outreach. Be careful there, okay? You review a book from a well-known author, that's content. Then you can tag that author on social media when you promote the post. That is content. When that author shares your link, because they very often will, 9 times out of 10, that's free publicity for them, that's outreach, because now that audience of that author who didn't know about you now knows about you. Then you can end your own podcast with a call to action to join your email list. That's permission. And then your newsletter would have a link to buy your book. That's selling. Starting to see how this fits together? Okay, so here's what we went over, and then we'll have time for Q&A here. We've talked about why just using that slapdash tactics from the internet is not going to work for you. You've got to get clear on your framework, who's your ideal reader, what kind of outreach do you need to be doing, what fits for one writer is not necessarily the best fit for you. We talked about defining marketing as building a long-lasting relationship rather than just pushing your book on people. And we talked about your number one goal of book marketing is to what? Tell me in the chat. What's our number one goal? Somebody, number one goal of book marketing. Email list. Yes, you guys got it. Fantastic. And then we learned all 4 parts of the system, of which your email list is one component. So we've got permission, content, outreach, and selling. Okay. The next step for you, which is critically important for you to implement all of this, is to get really clear on your ideal reader. This is going to help you make almost every single marketing decision that you have to make if you know who your ideal reader is. So I have a free on-demand webinar that you can watch anytime. Go to tinyurl.com/reader persona, and you can get that webinar as well. So that'll be your next step. Now you've got your underlying strategy, then you get clear on your ideal reader so you can start implementing that strategy with that person in mind. You'll know what kind of content to write, what kind of influencers to reach out to. You've got to know that ideal reader. And Micah just put in the chat links to that sign up form, or links to that reader persona. Okay, so we have time for Q&A. Oh, I nailed it. It is 11:39 Portland time.
Yes, awesome. That was great, Sue. We have a ton of questions. I'm going to try to consolidate a couple that are similar too. So first, we have a few different people asking how they can go about building up their email list before they actually have a book out.
Yes. Okay, so great question. Now, where's my lizard? Your little lizard brain, right? Your limbic system is going to give you all kinds of reasons. Everything I just told you won't work for you, right? I don't have a book yet. How am I supposed to go out and promote my book if I don't have a book yet? How am I supposed to build an email list? What you want to do is, again, get clear on that ideal reader. Even if your book isn't done yet, if you know what kind of story you're telling, what kind of romance you're writing, you will know the kind of person that you're trying to attract, and you can start developing content for them, even if you don't have an entire book, right? So you can, let me try to think of an example off the top of my head. Well, okay, this is a nonfiction example, but it's perfect. So James Clear wrote Atomic Habits, right? This book has sold over 3 million copies. He didn't write that book until he had an audience of 100,000 people. So he had started writing about habits and blogging and guest posting and doing all of these things to build that audience. That got him a book deal because boom, you have 100,000 people on your email list. Any literary agent and publisher is going to be like, hell yes, we'll give you a book deal. So he had built that audience beforehand by talking about the things that his ideal reader wanted to know about. So in the case of romance, if you have a very tight romance niche, maybe it's Second Chance, you can start talking about all of the best second chance romance stories. You can give reviews of other books, and people will come to know you as someone who's, always providing value by telling me what books I need to read next of the books that I love, right? Get clear on your ideal reader and start serving that reader, and you can build your list ahead of time, which I always want people to do, right? If at all possible, start building your audience before your first book comes out, because that is only going to help give you momentum to go forward.
Now, whenever you have the audience, how do you nurture them to keep them coming back rather than unsubscribing from your emails?
Great. So first thing is, as a rule, you don't need to be terrified of unsubscribes, right? It's just life. People will unsubscribe. It's okay. But we want to see you retaining most of your subscribers. And the way to do that, again, is by delivering value to them. So every time they open an email from you, they have to have a great experience. Maybe they got entertained. Maybe they learned something. Maybe they got a discount on something. Maybe you ran a giveaway, right? Any number of things you can do to provide value and make their life or their day even just a little bit better. They're going to want to stay on your list and keep following you.
Now, what if you have someone who wants to publish a novel, but they'd like to remain anonymous and use a pen name and also not reveal their identity in public? How can they go about marketing properly?
So you just use everything as your pen name. So your website would be in your pen name. If you really don't even want your real voice out there, then you're not going to do podcasts, right? Then you might think about, instead of influencers who have podcasts, maybe you want to write guest articles under your pen name. Lots of choices for that. Just think of it as, a complete fake identity, right? It's fine. You can be transparent that it's a pen name, but you can protect your own identity, and you'll just want to be thoughtful and careful. And I'm sure there's actually probably information on the internet about all the things you need to think about, right? So people couldn't track you down. But there are ways to do that, and you can still do your marketing. Think outside the box, right? This is an underlying framework of outreach, but there are all different kinds of outreach that you can do. It's not always in-person things where, I'm talking to you on a webinar and you can clearly see who I am. You can do guest articles. You can you go on podcasts and just use your pen name, all kinds of things.
Whenever an author gets everything set up under one genre, say they want to transfer to a different genre, we have someone that asked, they have a lot of different things like email lists for nonfiction academic, but now to get into romance books, do they redo all of that, or can they, kind of double dip?
Okay, so this is a great question, and I'm going to answer it more broadly, and I'll try to get a little bit into your specific scenario. But this happens to a lot of people, right? We don't necessarily want to write the same kind of book forever and ever. So there are a couple of things you can do, because certainly it's it's easier to just build one audience. It's easier to maintain. It takes less time. So the first thing I want you to think about is there a through line in my work? Even if I've got two different genres, do I always have strong female protagonists? Do I always talk about social justice issues, even if they're completely different genres, even if they're fiction and nonfiction? So you can build an audience base of people who care about your thematic content, and you can build it based on that. And there are a lot of people who will read in different genres. Not always. There are some exceptions and people who are just like, no, this is all I read. But generally, if you're talking thematically, people want to follow that particular thing, so they're willing to follow along with you. So look for that common thread, and you can push your marketing to focus on that common thread, and you can attract all the people who are interested in that. There are exceptions, right? If you're writing, steamy romance and kids books, you can't have those on the same website, right? You definitely need to create two different author platforms in that case. You would have one for your steamy romance, and you would have a separate one and perhaps even a pen name for your children's books. And you need to keep those separate and just do double duty of marketing. The other thing that you can do is, if this is sort of phases of your career, is you can think about marketing one thing for a certain length of time, and then at a certain point you pivot and switch over and can start building an audience for a different period of time. So let's say, you've already have your nonfiction academic audience that you've built. If you don't need to continue building that because you've really made a hard stop, you can let that one drop and now start to pivot and build an audience for your romance work. It will likely be a different audience for you specifically, but certainly you can invite the people in your other audience over. There may be some people who are interested, but I wouldn't keep them on the same list. In that case, I would start a fresh list. So in summary, if you can do it under one platform because there's a thematic thread, do it. If you can sort of project management in different phases and say, I'm going to do this for a year and a half, and then I'm going to switch, I'm going to do this for a year and a half, you can do that. But in some cases, you will have to do two separate platforms.
We have a couple of questions about reader magnets. So with the variety of free reads and freebies out there, especially for ebook users, how can the writers attract buyers and not just freebie seekers? And are readers getting tired of all of these reader magnets?
So again, Inner Lizard will tell you that everyone is getting completely tired of all reader magnets. It's dead, right? They're over. Not true. Certainly for some people, right? They may be done with it. They may have sort of like moved on, and that's fine. But by and large, reader magnets are still a wonderful tool. We do want to keep sort of on the cutting edge of it. Like the days of just offering the first 2 chapters of your book as your reader magnet are pretty much over. You want to be offering a complete reading experience, even if it's just a short story. So I think it's a very valid question about the tire kickers, right? Like they just want the freebies and they're never actually going to pay for a book. That is a valid concern. There are a couple things that you can think about. One is, instead of offering like a freebie, you could offer a very low priced book. So you have people who are at least willing to spend a little bit of money. That's one option. Another option is just to clean your list of the freebie people from time to time. So you're building a list with a free reader magnet. And then if those people don't stay engaged, you can clean them off of your list, and you just keep building and keep cleaning and keep building and keep cleaning. But reader magnets are still a very valuable way to go. Just make sure that you are really thinking, is my reader magnet perfect for the same person who is perfect to read my book and buy my book? So make sure they're aligned. Sometimes we try to get away with like having a reader magnet that's not really aligned. Like, here's my poetry collection reader magnet, and then here's my steamy romance book you can buy. That's not the same target reader. So you got to make sure that your reader magnet is really appealing to the same person you want to buy the book.
We have a couple of questions surrounding social media. So if an author really hates using social media, they don't want to use it to market, what are some ways they can market successfully without social media? And also, is it possible to kind of build your own community via your own website rather than going through a site like Facebook?
Yes. So I'm maybe one of the few book marketers who will tell you, you do not need social media to be a successful author. Like, you really don't. The thing that social media is good for is actually building one-on-one relationships with influencers and sort of cozying up to influencers and starting to build friendships with real people, like the social and social media. It doesn't work as sort of like, I'm going to push meme after meme of quotes from my book and then send people to buy it. It just doesn't work. So that would be a waste of time. So if you really despise social media, if you were my client, I would not force you to be on social media. You would be focusing on those other kinds of outreach. So getting on a podcast, doing guest articles, doing in-person events, when everybody's comfortable with that again. There are lots of other avenues for outreach. You notice that social media wasn't really one of my big things on the list of potential outreach that you could do. Can you build your own community? Yes, you can, but I would say your website is not really the place these days where that's happening. You can think of your community as your newsletter. You can build it through your newsletter. It's not as interactive. Or of course, you can create, a Discord channel. You can use a different service that's not as Facebook groupy, like social media specific, but there are other pieces of software that will help you actually build a community. Some authors are even starting their own membership groups, like a paid membership group, or a Patreon. Patreon's another place where you can actually build community. So lots of ideas. Don't put yourself in a box where we think there's only one way to do all of this, right? It almost doesn't even matter what you do, as long as you pick something where your ideal reader is and you do it consistently and with your heart.
We have a user who is concerned about promoters and predators who are targeting indie writers out there on the internet. What's a good way to find support for marketing or to hire a marketing expert for indie authors specifically without being taken advantage of or scammed?
Can you read the first sentence of that question again? I just want to make sure.
Sure.
I was distracted by the chat.
No problem. The user is concerned about the amount of promoters and predators who are targeting indie authors specifically. So how can they avoid that? How can they avoid falling into the trap of being scammed?
Well, the first thing is a lot of people, anybody who's in this space and doing good work is putting out a lot of free content, right? There's at some level of free content available to you so that you can digest it and decide if you know, like, and trust this person, right? Like David Gogren, for example, is fantastic in this space. He writes books about like BookBub. He's got a great book on advertising through BookBub. He has a wonderful newsletter packed with free information. If there's very little free, like there's no blog, there's no free webinars, there's no nothing, they just want you to go straight to buying something, that is certainly a red flag. So follow people first, try to get a sense of them. And then if they have a Facebook group and it's free, you can join that Facebook group and see what other people in the club are, what kind of feedback are they getting, right? See if you can get a sense of the people around that person who are following that person, and how are they doing, and do they trust this person? It seems like they've been there for a long haul. So yes, there are scams out there, certainly, but there are also just a lot of good people, and there's a lot of great people to choose from. Just because someone is asking for money doesn't mean that they are scamming. People who sell information like this, it's because we spend all of our time cramming our head with all this information. It's our livelihood. It's what we love doing. So yes, there are absolutely scammers out there. Try to get a hold of their free content. See if it makes sense to you, if it jives with the currents of what people are doing, and dip your toe in, right? Usually there's like a starter product where you're not going to be spending thousands and thousands of dollars. You can like buy their book, or you can buy their little mini course and get a taste of it first before you fork over thousands of dollars.
How would you recommend authors could best approach other authors and build relationships with networking to gain more support?
Yeah, so find other authors in your niche. I am very much of the mindset that other authors are not your competition, right? They're people who could be in your cohort, and it can be an all boats rise kind of situation. It's not as if people who read romance books are only reading one romance book all year, and you're all vying for that same person and their $8 to buy their one book a year. You have an audience who's hungry for as many titles as possible. So pooling your resources with other writers, doing joint promos where you're all getting together and putting together a bundle of your books, and then you're all pushing it out to your lists is a great way to go. You can join book promos on BookFunnel. BookFunnel has a great list of book promos that you can do to either build your newsletter or do a sale for your book. I saw someone in the comments that said BookBub and BookFunnel are two different things. BookBub only works if you already have a lot of reviews. They won't take your book otherwise. There are two avenues on BookBub. One is to get the featured deal, which is true. They have a pretty rigorous editorial process. But the other thing that they offer is ads. So you can just run ads, which you control, and there's no editorial review process on BookBub, and you can completely control the dollar amount, right? So you could spend $5 and just try it and see what works for you.
We have a couple of questions regarding, if you are a traditionally published author, is it necessary to still kind of go through these same marketing steps? Can you avoid
it? Oh, yes, honey. For 98% of authors who are traditionally published, they absolutely still need to do this entire process. Publishers don't think that readers are their audience. Publishers think that bookstores are their audience, right? They're not interested, and they don't know how, mostly, to market effectively in the way that authors are now expected to do for themselves. That's why the people who get the traditional book deals are the people who already have their audiences built, right? Because publishing companies just don't have the funds to do that. They don't have the staff to do that. I was just traditionally published. I'm a hybrid author. I have a middle grade novel for kids that I independently published. And then I have a nonfiction book that just came out in September that's traditionally published. I am not exaggerating when I say our publisher did not do anything in terms of marketing for us. So you really want to, if you're traditionally published, get ahead of it. If you want to avoid it, that's fine, but you just probably have to adjust your expectations to how many books you'll sell, right? Nobody that says you have to market, but you have to adjust your expectations of what the book is going to do. Is it possible to absolutely knock it out of the park and have lightning strike and have a successful book without doing any marketing? Of course. But by and large, it does take consistent, not like 40 hours a week of effort, but a consistent, sustained effort and strategy that you're carrying forward over a long period of time to have success.
I think you touched on this briefly already regarding the email list prior to being published, but we do have a lot of questions about specifically when is the best time to build the website. Can you go ahead and do that prior to your book? Should you?
Yes. So My two colleagues, Pages and Platforms, we have developmental editing services, and they did a session on Monday, Anne and Rochelle, if you caught that session, and they talk about story types, right? So a story type helps you know what kind of story you're telling, and then what that story needs to contain at a high level. So at Pages and Platforms, I say, once you know your story type, and you guys already know because you're writing romance, so you automatically have a love story. You might have a secondary story type. But once you know you're writing a love story for a specific kind of audience and a specific kind of reader, you're ready to start marketing. And the sooner you do so, the better you'll set yourself up. So as soon as you know who my ideal reader would be for this kind of romance novel, great, then I can put up my website. I know what images to use, I know what language to use, I know what this reader is looking for. And you can start building your email list at that time too. So the sooner the better.
I think we have time for just a couple more. We do have a few questions about influencers. Where is the best place to find them? And how do you handle the situation if an influencer were to dislike your writing rather than like it?
Okay, great question. I have like a whole 4.5 hour workshop on how to find and pitch influencers. So it's a really big topic, but I'll give you the quickest, easiest cheat sheet form of finding influencers. Look for people who are comparable authors to you, who've done a good job with their marketing, and figure out what they did to reach out to influencers. So what podcasts have they been on? Where did they write guest articles? What conferences did they go to? And you just piggyback and you pitch all that same list of people, right? If it's truly a comparable book, then that's the audience that you want. And that helps you accelerate your research. There are 4 other ways to do it as well, but we're like at 1 minute left. And then the second question is, what if an influencer dislikes your book? It honestly doesn't come up very often. And if they really disliked your book, then all they would do is say no. I'm sorry, I can't have you on the podcast, or they would ignore you, right? Those are the 2 worst things that can happen. They can say no, or they can ignore you. And if either of those things happen to you, it does not mean that they hated your book and you suck. It means that they have their own reasons, and we should always assume the very best of their reasons about why they said no or why they ignored you, right? We never know what's going on with another person, and we don't need to make it mean anything about us.
Thank you so much, Sue. And thank you to everybody who came today for the session. I know there's a lot of questions we unfortunately did not have enough time to get to. However, Sue has graciously offered to visit our Facebook group after this. I will tag her in a post, and then if you have questions or comments for Sue, you can put them in the comments of the post, and she will try to answer as many as she can. But and we will also have the slides posted on the Romance Writers Week Hub later today. So thank you again. This was great. The chat has been going crazy. There were so many questions. Everyone's just loving this material. So we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks. I had so much fun. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.